All right. Well, welcome once again, everybody, to another, excuse me, episode and edition of What You Believe. I'm Devin Croner. I'm your host, and I am so glad to have you here with me as we get ready to have what I think is going to be a very engaging and insightful interview with somebody about really what's kind of a current event topic, something that is being discussed a lot, and that is racism, race relations, black and white versus working together, all of it. There's a lot to talk about. There are a lot of different ways that I think we can begin to view the whole situation differently than what is portrayed. It doesn't matter what media source you're looking at, but we have to be able to have discussions. We have to be able to talk with people. And that is exactly what I'm excited to do today. So let me go ahead and bring in our guest. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. There he is. Can you hear me, sir?
I can. What's going on? You doing all right?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, good, good. Well, first and foremost, thank you for taking the time to join me and to have this discussion. I appreciate your time very, very much. Uh, as we get started, go ahead, tell us a little bit about who you are, a little bit about your background, and we'll kind of go from there.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the opportunity and you reaching out, Devin. So, guys, my name is Cameron Tucker. I'm originally from Radcliffe, Kentucky. I was born and raised there. My father was in the military. He actually uh, resigned or finished his contract, rather, with the military from Germany. Him, my mother, and my two oldest brothers uh, resided in Hardin County in Kentucky and stayed there. And they popped me out, and the rest is history. um, I was born and raised there and lived in the same house my entire life, which doesn't really happen a lot anymore. I'm an educator, and so I hear a lot about my students, and a lot of them are part of the transient population. So I'm really appreciative and grateful for the structure and the consistency that I was, afforded to have in my childhood.
Mhm. Absolutely. Tell us about growing up in Hardin County in Kentucky. What was that experience like, especially as we talk about today racial inequality, racial injustice, systemic racism, all those sorts of things. What did you experience? What were you aware of? What were you not really aware of just because that's where you're from?
That's a good question. So the county is pretty rural. In Kentucky, we know that's fairly normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but there's an army base in the county, which is not common and anywhere in the country. So the northern part of the county is where the base is. Radcliffe is right south of the base. So obviously the base is going to be very diverse, a lot of different cultures and ethnicities. Radcliffe, right outside the base, a lot of different cultures, ethnicities. E-Town, just south of Radcliffe, that's the county seat. It's about 150 plus years old. Radcliffe is still a fairly relatively young city. It's only about 50, 60 years old. It was actually annexed from Fort Knox. So pretty young, still kind of growing into its own as a city. E-Town, more established, has some of that older Southern, if you will, culture that, kind of has some of that ethnic dissonance. And so there was a little bit of friction in the county. And some of that was obvious, some of it not so much, but it was spoken. There would be a lot of comments from people at the southern end of the county like, oh, don't go to Radcliffe, or don't go to Fort Knox, or there's a road that kind of splits Radcliffe and E-Town, Joe Prather Highway, and there were people like, oh, I've never been past Joe Prather. Like, there's something scary in Radcliffe. There was nothing scary about Radcliffe. It was just a more diverse city.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's still going on. And there's been, a lot of just a lot of cultural shift, just time, it really just takes time to undo some of that old mindset, and people crossing that road and really getting to know the people that live there. And really, they're no different, man. They just have different mindsets and just have been raised differently. And once people get to see past those barriers, it's not too much different.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that we're going to be discussing here in this time is just the differences in experiences, uh, racism, how racial injustice, inequality, how we can deal with that kind of. It's kind of an all-encompassing sort of subject. But again, what I'm so interested in is just the difference in experience, because there's a whole culture and a whole way that you have experienced life that I haven't, because of the color of my skin, even though I grew up in a rural area in central Illinois, but very rural. But there was only, to my knowledge, only one black person in my entire school system
Wow.
when I was there, and so it's a very different experience. uh, and so I'm interested to know what that is like from your perspective, just growing up, and the things that maybe I wouldn't even think of, that you have to think of, that you have to be aware of, because again, that's part of the problem that's gotten us to where we are, is that, for lack of a better term, white people don't know this stuff.
Sure. Sure. And so to speak to what you were saying, so there, our county, I believe it's the biggest in the state in regards to size, the land. It's a very big state, rural, a lot of farms. And so I believe there's 5 high schools in the county. The southernmost high school, um, not a very diverse school. And back in the 90s and 2000s, early 2000s, I believe it was the biggest high school in the state. That was Central Hardin. And then the school I went to, North Hardin, was one of the biggest in the state also. And then they made another high school, I believe in 2000 or 2002, John Hardin was open. And so that kind of split some of the populations there. And so really within the county, you had Central Hardin, which is a super predominantly white high school, North Hardin, very diverse high school, Elizabethtown High School, small independent school,
Mhm.
uh, very much entrenched into the stereotypical culture of Elizabethtown, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, Not a very diverse high school, but it was a city school, so there were some, whatever low income populations within the city that would have to go to the school, being within the limits.
Mhm.
Um, and so there was a lot of that. Let's see here. So there would be times, Devin, where my parents growing up, they would say, son, you have to act a certain way when you go out in public. Uh, they would say, oh, I played baseball growing up
Mhm.
for about 10 years. Every kid who had a baseball hat, whether they played baseball or not, turned their hat backwards at some point. My dad would say, son, you can't wear your hat backwards. I'm like, Dad, everybody else has their hat backwards. Why can't I wear my hat backwards? Or he'd say, son, I didn't sag. I wasn't a sagger with my pants. It wasn't comfortable to me. I didn't like sagging. If I had the slightest little bit of anything where it appeared that my pants were below my waist, my dad would hit me with that comment and mini lecture, like, son, you can't sag. I'm like, Dad, I'm not sagging. He would go, you can't sag, pull your pants up. Okay. And so all this stuff is ingrained. And then slowly as I got older, there'd be more, son, if you get pulled over by the police, have your hands on the steering wheel, be polite, don't come across aggressive,
Mhm.
uh, none of that. And he explained to me why. And, it's because I could be perceived as a threat.
Mhm.
And then even as I've gotten older, I'm very much a relational person. I'm a people person. I sometimes, not sometimes, my wife would laugh at me if I was not honest. I wear my emotions on my sleeve,
Mhm.
and if I'm upset or displeased about something, I'll show that. And I've gotten better about showing that, and not a super overly expressive way, but um, if I come across as aggressive, or if I'm sad, like I can't emote. My parents would talk to me about my emotions and not being able to express them fully because somebody
Mhm.
could see that as me being mean or aggressive. And I'm just like, man, there's so much that I have to curb or think about or process before I can even do it, and it was a lot. It still is a lot.
Mm-hmm. That is, I mean, you hear kind of tidbits, I guess, of these things, but I mean, just the idea of that conversation about being pulled over, and just for speeding, right? Or you got a tail light out, or you didn't stop long enough at the stop sign. I mean, those are things like my parents had that conversation about being respectful and making sure you obey command, but it was just because they knew that I was young and was liable to not pay full attention. There was never a concern for my life in those situations.
Sure.
But for you, and not just you, I mean, we're talking about Black people throughout the country. Really, this is a conversation that really does happen even today, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, what, from the standpoint of a kid, first, what is that like to have your parents tell you this, and what does that do to your perception of police officers, law enforcement officials that are, again, supposed to be there to serve and protect?
That's a good question. So I'm a believer. I was raised in the church, and I was baptized at an early age. But really, when I came to know the Lord, I believe is when I was in college, when I had a transformative moment and really accepted Christ in my life. But I was in church pretty much every Sunday growing up, and there were some law enforcement officers who were within my church. So they were some really cool guys, and I even have some Leos in my family. So I kind of had it from both sides. I didn't have just this, I didn't even have, don't like the police. That wasn't ingrained into me. My parents are not those type of people. And my family, even my extended family, they don't think like that. And so they were just like, son, be respectful as your parents did you. And there were some caveats because of my skin color. And so just from a young age, it was just normalized. You saw it in the movies, uh, and then I remember even, it's funny thinking about it. And I remember when I was a kid, I think we were leaving the bank, and my dad had to run back home real quick before the bank closed. And I think he might have been speeding a little bit. And I just remember the police officer being really aggressive with my dad. And I was just like, I saw my dad, he was a military guy again, can keep his cool. He's a coach, head coach for so many years. And I just remember him talking to my dad a certain way. And I was just like, man, in my eyes as a kid, we all thought our dad, well, for most people, if they had a good relationship with their dad, they thought, he's like a hero in my eyes. I was like, why is he talking to my dad like that?
Mm-hmm.
And, just little things like that. Obviously my dad was speeding, but just, my dad was not a very emotive guy. He didn't talk about that with me at all. But I remember that speaking to you now. Little things like that sit with me. And then as you grow up, and whether I'm riding with a friend and something happens with him, or, we see stuff through social media, it builds up. And,
Mm-hmm.
again, as a believer, I have to, rely on Holy Spirit to help me stay submitted to Christ, and not, just get entrenched in the propaganda, or not even propaganda, but just what is really going on, and not allow my emotions to overtake me, and just really, try to stay level-headed, and, showing the love of Christ.
Mm-hmm. And that's such an important thing too, because again, there's reality to the hurt and the anger that is being emoted in the country right now, and that needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be addressed. Right?
Absolutely.
But there's also a very real other side that can't be ignored. That, again, some people, and I don't know how to phrase this, so help me with this, of, at what point are you defeating your own argument in your response?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I've had a lot of these similar conversations with that topic at the forefront with my wife. Productive.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I've kind of gone back and forth. Forgive me for that. I guess somebody's okay. Here we go. And so, I guess to answer that question, as a person, the law's the law. I don't agree with, uh, destroying people's property,
Mhm.
uh, committing crimes in response to a crime. I don't believe retaliation um, is legally right unless it's, somebody's, you're defending yourself, obviously. But I don't believe Jesus was a man of retaliation that was premeditated. Um, and so there's that piece. But to the other side, like you're saying, I understand
Right.
um, where it comes from being suppressed, people feeling suppressed. Just
Mhm.
I don't think I've had it horrible when it comes to my interactions with law enforcement. I haven't had it bad. I'm not going to sit here and make it seem like my life, like I'm scarred per se. I've had experiences, but I know that there's people who've had it way worse than I have, and so, and it might be a family thing. They might have had, you know, somebody's older brother and father or mother may have had bad experiences, and
Mhm.
so they just have built up anger for decades,
Yeah.
even. If there's
Mhm.
generational bad experiences with, the legal authorities, and so I can understand why there would be that anger. Um, but that doesn't make it right. But I understand where it would come from and why it would manifest. I didn't even know this. There was the night before, or the day before Martin Luther King's assassination, his last speech. There's a quote in his sermon or speech where he says something to the effect of the riots are the voice of the unheard. He wasn't saying that to justify rioting or to give people to gaslight rioting or say, go ahead, you are unheard, so go riot. That's not what that was. But he was saying, if people are suppressed, regardless of skin color, if because this has been going on since the Bible, man, and people have been, overthrowing kings, since before any of us were even thought of. So this is nothing new. Um, think about Moses, or not Moses, you know, where, oh my gosh. Yeah, where Moses was leading the people through the departed sea. He was restoring people's lives.
Mhm.
Um, and so Martin Luther King saying that he's a man of peace, but he understood. If Martin Luther King can understand, then I think anybody who wants to have an open mind and open heart can choose to understand where it's coming from. That doesn't excuse it. That doesn't make it right. Um, but that's where it comes from. So I don't agree with it. I haven't participated in it, but I know where it comes from. Um, just kind of an example, if you put your finger on just like a rubber ball, if you
Mhm.
just push it down, if you push it down, if you let it go, it's gonna bounce. It's
Mhm.
gonna go wherever. Because it's suppressed, it's kept down, it's pushed down. And when you let it go, um, it's going to respond. It's
That's a
natural.
good point. And again, one, we have to acknowledge that some of these things are not right. That have been happening to uh, minorities. I mean, not just Black people, Latino people, Asian people. I mean, you can
Absolutely.
go on down the line. I mean, the argument, I think, that racism is not real uh, is a pretty weak argument, even though there are people that say that. It's a matter of understanding the cause and why, because there are, not that racism is ever right, but there are things that are done because that's just the way we've always done it, and people, white people especially, don't think of it as being racist until somebody points it out. And
Yeah.
then there are things that are done on purpose, and then there are things that are kind of codified, And we have that in this country too, where, the idea of statues, for instance, being torn down. I remember thinking several weeks back when this was first coming out in the news, well, that's stupid. They're tearing down statues. But when you start really thinking about not just who they were, but where did these statues actually come from? Some of these Confederate leaders, these weren't statues that were commemorating things from like when the Civil War happened. These were put in decades later to try and really instill fear and oppress people in their communities, and kind of as a reminder of, remember who we are, remember what we did. It gives it a whole different perspective then, doesn't
It
it?
does. It does.
So we've got to change, I think, the conversation, and not just, oh, well, this is right and this is wrong, because two things can be true at the same time. It can be wrong that, a police officer kneels on a man's neck until he dies. That's wrong. It can also be wrong that somebody, throws a brick through a window and sets a building on fire. That can also be wrong. However, you don't get to that point if people are listening to you back here, right? So how do we begin having that conversation more in a productive way in your mind? Like what can we do, white people do, for instance, what can we do to engage with the Black community to really begin to address these things?
That's a great question, Devin. I think it really starts. That's kind of a two-sided answer. I think part of it starts in the school system. Um, if you can think back to when you were in primary school, uh, when we first learned social studies information, uh, I can remember the Thanksgiving time of the school year, and we made a turkey with our hand and painted it and painted this happy scene with Native Americans and Europeans. Um, but really, man, that's not our country's founding wasn't an exciting, kumbaya moment.
Mhm.
Um, really, and I'm sure they have, but it just hasn't been as publicized in the media. I don't think to the effect that um, oppression with blacks has. But Native Americans, man, they really have a strong argument to say, hey, what about us? We've been having this fight for 400 years
Mhm.
here on this land. So, uh, and that still comes up about periodically with the pipeline arguments and not wanting their land destroyed or
Mhm.
burial grounds and things of that nature.
Mhm.
So really, it goes back to kind of the education of our youth, and just kind of not the phrase is called whitewashing. I'm not sure if you've heard that term. Some of our history is kind of whitewashed and
Mhm.
painted to just kind of show this beautiful, not it's not overly beautiful, but this mostly beautiful picture of American history with a little bit of salt and pepper thrown in there with a quick teaching of slaves only in February, and all the black teaching or anything of black history is only in February,
Mhm.
and then the founding of our country is only in November around Thanksgiving time. And so if we're teaching the history of our country, we should have a full picture of that and the full scope of what that looks like.
Mhm.
So that's one part of my answer to that question. The other part of that is, and again, this comes from me being a believer, so that's where my answers are filtered through the Bible. I believe that those conversations also come about as the people who are in the middle, and I'm not talking about conservative, left, right, liberal. I'm talking about people who have a level head, who can have an open heart and an open-minded conversation of all ethnicities. I think all ethnicities need to be at tables with these discussions, to just really beyond discussion, just to live life with people, man.
Mm.
Um, it's hard for people in the southern end of the county where I'm from to have a perspective of Black people beyond what they see on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or TMZ or World Star Hip Hop or Snapchat if they don't go have relationships with these people. Or in Eastern Kentucky, or it's hard for people in the West End of Louisville, or another mostly Black area in the state or in the nation to have a positive outlook of people who don't look like them or white people if they don't go and have positive interactions or relationships with them
Right.
beyond what they see on Facebook or Twitter or any social media or World Star Hip Hop. If they don't remove their train of thought, whether it's their surroundings, it's going to be hard for those lines of thought to be manipulated.
Mm.
And so the people who are level-headed and can have those conversations have to, especially the ones who may not already have relationships with people who don't look like them, they have to forge those relationships, do life with them, talk with them, learn how I may have had wrong perceptions about somebody who doesn't look like me, and to go and share that in their communities if they're
Being
not already
intentional,
in the same communities.
being intentional about
Yes.
interacting with people that maybe don't look like you or haven't thought like you or didn't grow up the way that you grew up. And that's hard because again, we get into this mode of life, job, bills, family, things like that, and you kind of fall into a silo. And it
Absolutely.
doesn't matter if you're in the inner city or a suburb or the country, you kind of fall into your silo. And
Yeah.
there's, like growing up, I didn't interact with inner city people unless we went to like a Bulls game or a Cubs game or something like that. And then we were downtown. And even then, leaving, my dad wanted to get out of town as quickly as possible. And I didn't necessarily realize why as a kid, but I do remember one specific night. I remember being at a Bulls playoff game the year that they went 72-10 and against the Supersonics, and we're leaving after that finals game, and my dad is blowing red lights on the south side of Chicago. I'm like, Dad, you're going to get pulled over. He goes, I don't care. We need to get out of here. And I'm looking around and like everything's all barred up and all that. And I thought, well, what's wrong? He goes, this is that part of town. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but it did create this perception, right? Because I did see all the people that were out at that time of night were all Black people, right? So it creates that perception. And
Yeah.
if you don't address that, if you don't talk about it, if you don't think, well, why is this that part of town? What makes it that part of town? How do we make it not that part of town? All of those things, they require time and they require being intentional to bring, mm, not change necessarily, but to bring commonality, to bring
Mm-hmm.
understanding, right?
Yeah.
And most people just don't necessarily have the will or the desire to do that.
They don't. Because it's comfortable to stay in our ways, Devin.
Mm-hmm.
It's comfortable.
And so then we get to these moments like we're in now where things become more explosive. And it's just like in a marriage relationship, right? If you are married and you have a problem with your spouse and you guys basically decide just not to talk about it, it simmers, and you go on and you're doing
Great
stuff
point.
and you smile and you go to church together and you're holding hands and, oh, we're blessed, and all that stuff. And then something else happens and it blows up, and like you pull that hatchet back out of that wound that didn't heal properly, and you start hacking at each other again. And now we're doing that nationally because there are all of these old wounds of the way that we have treated, again, I don't want to just say the Black community, but that's how it's manifesting primarily. And it's being Sorry, something just popped up on my screen and I don't know what it is. Get that out of here. It's being focused on in such a way that I think it gives us an opportunity to talk about, how did we get to this point? Because again, you talked about whitewashing history. You know, not that we don't acknowledge the contributions of the founding fathers, right? I mean, the documents that we have, the nation that we have, but at the same time, we should be able to talk about the fact that Thomas Jefferson was not as great of a person sometimes as we make him out to be.
Right.
You know,
And the part in the Constitution where it talks about a person of color being 3/5 of a person.
yeah, like I don't even remember. I remember my American government class. I remember we had to memorize the preamble of the Constitution. I remember we had to, we had to make sure we knew what the first 10 amendments were. All that sort of stuff. I remember us glossing over that part. Like we read it because it was there and we were reading the whole thing, but my teacher wanted to move on from that as quickly as possible.
It's
And I think there
uncomfortable,
was
right?
a comment to the effect of, and that's not how it is today. And then we move on. And that's true in a sense of, okay, you are not considered legally 3/5 of a person. But in some areas, if you and I walk into a store together, if you and I walk into a restaurant together or sit down or go to a sporting event or something, the way that people are going to look at you and the way people are going to look at me, even if we're dressed the same, even if we go in together and we're obviously engaged with one another in conversation, is going to be different. And that's a problem that
It
I
is.
think needs to be acknowledged.
It should. I agree 100%. Um,
What role do you think the family plays in all of this? White families, black families, Asian families, Native American families, whatever it is, because we can't codify everything. We can't just make laws because that doesn't really work. We make it worse doing that. But again, you're a believer. I'm a believer. I'm a pastor. I believe that the family is a very important part of the answer to a lot of these
100%.
things. What role does the family play in this in your mind?
To answer that question, I'll have to go back again. So when slaves were freed, um, have you seen the Netflix documentary, The 13th?
Yes.
Really, really good documentary. I learned a lot from that documentary.
Mhm.
I did not realize, so throughout the last few months, I'd seen um, some posts shared about how, the police departments in America were established, around, as we know it. Obviously, there were, cowboys and all that stuff running towns, but as we understand policing today was really formalized around the time that slavery was abolished. And a lot of that was to, uh, regain working people for the work that was lost when the slaves were freed.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the men and the boys were arrested for very silly, petty crimes, and kept for ridiculous amounts of times compared to white people in the South, in order to continue having the labor for these, large farms or plantations.
Mhm.
And so, and even before then, that started kind of the breaking up of the, back then it was the African family, and so at the African American family. And so that dynamic, I believe, to answer your question, I believe the family plays a huge role um, within the Black community in America. I think that is harder, especially in the low income communities, where some of those effects are seen even worse,
Mhm.
where there's not a traditional family with a mother and father and children.
Mhm.
And so, because there's not that dynamic, from 200 plus years ago, where the husband and wife were broken up, um, that has been perpetuated for decades, over the last couple of centuries. And so there's I don't know the statistics, but if you compare homes in America with, different ethnic demographics, um, I can imagine that the stats would support that the homes of Black people are less traditional than other ethnicities, and so because of that, there's already some working against the current, if you will, with trying to break habits and reestablish a new culture of, all right, this may be the mindset of people that don't look like me, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't look like me that don't support me or support people who look like me. And so that's where that starts. Um, you can't, like you said, you can't change laws overnight to change mindsets overnight, but you can, within a family dynamic, you know, undo teachings to children, reteach, um, teach infants as they get older, proper teaching, um, especially households of faith, Christian faith. I think there's a huge, 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 huge calling here in America for households of Christian faith to rise up and to, foster and adopt children.
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge calling. I think there needs to be, um, less of a wall to adopt. That's something that my wife and I are having to endure right now. There's a lot of money involved to adopt children, and that just really, I don't think, in my opinion, should be the case. To because children are literally going to be the ones who change the dynamic of the future. I understand that now, being an educator and teacher for 7 years. I see that now. I was in their shoes
Hmm.
12 to 20 years ago in the classroom. And so I see that now. How we were taught, we now express and exhibit. And so how we're teaching the kids now, they are going to express and exhibit. Um, and so, yeah, and really, Tony Evans. You familiar with Tony Evans, Pastor Evans?
Love Dr. Evans.
Oh my gosh, he's great.
I listen to him all day.
Yes, he's awesome, man. I did a men's Bible study a couple of years ago, and it was with some of his teachings he had put together. And one of the things he said that I will never forget, um, he said the cornerstone of America is the church. The cornerstone of the church is the family. The cornerstone of the family uh, is the man, biblically speaking. And so, really, he just really placed this heavy call and heavy charge on Christian men to rise up, reject passivity, and to just reassert, biblical teachings as it pertains to family and how we live about our lives at work and in the community.
Absolutely. And it's so telling. Again, the if people watching have not seen the Netflix documentary that you mentioned, the 13th, is that what it's called, I believe?
Yeah,
It really is worth the watch. I mean, I sat there from about 15 minutes in, mostly just stunned, um, thinking so many times I said out loud to my wife as we were watching it, it can't be true. It can't be real. This can't be the case. And yet, they're not just telling you things. Here's the data, here's the statistics. And what you were referring to about the arrest of again, African American men and boys after the end of the Civil War, predominantly in the South, was so revolutionary in my thought process. Because again, when I first reached out to you about having this conversation, my whole thing was I wanted to talk about fatherhood and the idea of, okay, we see that there's this problem in America, black versus white, if you want to call it that, but also there's a problem, within the African American community. That was my initial pitch to you of, where I want to talk about, where are the fathers? Like, yes, we need to do these things, but where are the fathers? And that answered the question to me in such a way that, again, never knew, never thought of, wouldn't have guessed. And I thought, oh my God, we did this on purpose to not just the generation after the Civil War, but to generations all the way up to today, because that ripple effect of what happened, again, it started off in the South, because what you said, and this is what's in the documentary, is they started arresting them for just, standing on the street corner for too long. And chewing gum and walking. Just ridiculous stuff. And then, okay, you're going to spend the next 10 years in prison for that. And then they put them into these work programs, which on one side you think, okay, yeah, you're taking criminals and you're putting them to work. They're serving the communities. They're serving the common good. Who's not in favor of that, right? If
Right.
pay to house them and pay to feed them, why not get some work out of them? But really, it was a whole new form of legal slavery.
Exactly.
And that's something that you just don't think of it that way. And then you fast forward to now, we're 2020. This can't still be going on.
No.
But it is.
It is, man. It's wild.
It is. Wild. And that the stories are out there, the stats are out there that, if you and I are both arrested for a first-time drug offense, the likelihood of me going to jail for that, pretty small. Pretty small. Unless I've got a whole bunch of it's pretty small.
Right.
The likelihood of you going to jail for that just because you're Black exponentially increases. You can't argue with the data.
You can't. There's a big story that came about. There was a young man, I believe, in New York that was arrested, I believe 3 or 4 years ago. Some petty, I don't know if it was a drug crime. I can't remember. But it became pretty popular. I think I don't know if there's a documentary about it or what, but I remember reading about it. The young man, they kept pushing his court date back, and he didn't have enough money for bail. And I don't know how he got out. If they kept wanting him to plead guilty. He was like, I'm not guilty. I didn't do anything. He was wrongfully arrested. And they finally let him go, and he committed suicide just from, he was in prison for like 2 or 3 years awaiting trial. Not even because he had been guilty of a crime, but allegedly committed a crime. And just the system within prison, thank God I've never been in. I don't know what it is, but obviously it'll change a person. And there was a negative effect for him when he came out.
Absolutely. And again, I can't remember his name, but this was just recently that he committed suicide.
Yeah.
I believe. But he had been on the news talking about his story and how, it was worth the fight and all these things, but just the effect that it had on him, that he just didn't tell anybody about. And so we look at now today, what I would term the fatherlessness epidemic in America. And it's an epidemic across the board, don't get me wrong.
It is.
But again, when you look at the statistics of it, it's much worse within the Black community.
It is.
And so my thing initially was, okay, how do we fix that? How do we help restore the families? How do we help get, dads back involved, men back involved in the lives of kids, so that they don't end up in gangs, so that they don't turn to drugs, so that they don't do all of these things that we say are bad. And that documentary, and then starting to have some of these conversations with people, has just in the last few weeks really led me to think, it's not as simple as, well, dads just need to step back up to the plate. They can't, because we're putting them in jail for stupid stuff. It's really a mindset shift that we have to have culturally, and a discussion that we have to have and be very honest about. And it's not comfortable.
And then why are they feeling the need to, if it's a drug crime, why are they feeling the need to sell drugs?
Mm-hmm.
We're not blind to it. If people have been outside of their community, they know there's not a lot of jobs in communities of low income. Again, I'm not justifying it, but people have to put food on the table for their family. I can understand.
You turn to what's available.
Yeah.
I mean, you really do. I had a conversation. I am a real estate agent as well as a pastor, and I had a conversation with a gentleman who came to me interested in buying a house. He's retirement age, and just a wonderful scholarly black gentleman. And he approached me, saw an ad that I had or something like that, said, I want you to help me find a house. Wonderful, happy to help. And so I asked him about his story. I said, you're renting, how long have you been renting, all those sorts of things to help me help him in doing the job. Come to find out that he had basically had his house taken away from him, that had been his family's home. His great great grandfather had literally built the place brick by brick by hand himself, and it had been taken away from him because it was a blighted neighborhood, and they decided they were going to regentrify the area. Now, again, you put that in the news, and we're bringing jobs, and we're bringing businesses, and we're bringing, renovations, and things are going to get changed and all that. It sounds great. It sounds fantastic. It sounds like, why would I be opposed to this? But the part that they don't talk about is the fact that, what are you taking away? You're taking away wealth, because they didn't pay him fair market value for that house.
No.
Even in the condition that it was in, they didn't pay him fair market value for that house. So he loses that, didn't have a mortgage on it. It had been in the family for like 125 years.
Wow.
And he basically gets left with nothing and put out on the street because he didn't have enough time to really find a place. So he lost most of his stuff as a result as well. And this is a guy that has lived his life. He's paid his taxes. He's contributed to society. He did everything right. And this is not a story that's unique to this gentleman. It's a story that happens all over the place. And we hear, oh, they're going to revitalize a blighted neighborhood. I came here to Northern Kentucky from the Detroit area. Huge thing up there. Blight. Every night on the news, blight. And, we need to redevelop these areas. But the people that are coming in to redevelop them they're taking away from the poor community that's there, and they're redeveloping it, white-owned businesses, housing that rich white people want to live in, right? And they're displacing these people. So what happens when what little you have is taken away? You're forced to turn to things that are not above board. You don't have a choice. And that's kind of where we have been. What it looks like for the last 150 years in this country is we keep perpetuating this cycle on minority communities in general, whether it's the Native Americans taking away their land and then taking away the land again, taking away the land again. And, so from, again, I'm doing a lot of talking here. I want you to jump in. From your perspective, what does this create? What kind of mindset does this create for you, for your family, for your friends, for everybody when that's what it looks like?
Yeah. So my wife and I, from before we got married, I was like, hey, babe, I feel like I don't know in what capacity or, what kind of platform, but I feel like God is going to use us to just kind of be a beacon, and not necessarily for Black people, but just in general as a family in Christ. He's going to use us as a model of some sort, and not in a perfectionist way or anything like that, because clearly we're humbled and sin just like any other person would who is not Jesus. But there are conversations that I have been having for a while. I'm a big Dave Ramsey guy, and just very grateful for him. We're working the debt snowball right now, almost debt free. And so again, I'm gonna repeat something I said earlier. I haven't had it awful. I'm not gonna sit here and act like I was raised in poverty. My parents were though. My father was raised. He was one of many siblings. fatherless home. Uh, Mother died at a young age, his young age. Uh, my mother, she was raised in a two-parent home. They were married. Uh, she had, I believe, 8 siblings. My father, again, his father was had children by 2 or 3 other women. Um, I believe he has siblings in the teens. So, two very different homes, uh, low income, especially for my father. Um, he went to the military. After college, he went to college. Both him and my mother, they graduated high school and they met in college. Um, so that was one thing that helped them out. They matriculated through the educational system and were able to, gather more intellect and, help themselves out in that way. Uh, to kind of go back to what you said a moment ago, uh, there has been a system that created, um, a culture of, you know, people of color can't get a job, from hundreds of years ago, 200 years ago. And, when slaves were freed, unless they were north of the Ohio River, they likely weren't going to get a job anywhere in the South.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so this cycle of, trying to make some money, a lot of it was, gambling. However, they found money to gamble, they gambled, and, that culture was established. Obviously, they didn't create it, but, they probably took it into a way where, like, man, I can make money off of this. Um, there's talk of, at some point in the past 100 years, the government infiltrating neighborhoods and getting people to sell drugs that way. I haven't done much research in that, but there's a little bit of smoke there. It must be some fire. I don't know how much truth is there with that. But again, there's been cycles perpetuated of, from the beginning, difficulty trying to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, my family's not just gonna, eat and drink air. So I have to have money to buy food. I
Right.
have to get some money. Um, so there's the cycle starting right there. And so over time, more and more people of color beyond just blacks have been able to have education and learn some things, and more have started to be able to learn for themselves over the last 30 years, especially with technology and the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So certain things are not just privy to certain individuals. If you have something you want to search and read, you can google google it, right? um,
Sure.
and so that has helped a lot. But at the end of the day, there has to be a desire to want to be better, right, in order for you to seek out better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had that conversation with my dad. I was just curious because, I was like, Dad, what made you want to get out of there? Really small town. There's only like 3,000 people, man. It's right by the Mississippi River in Missouri. We go there every year for Memorial Day, fun times. He always shows me his old friends. And, I'm grateful that, he was able to get out of there. And when I say that, I'm grateful that he was able to get out and create a life that he felt called to create. There's people there who actually chose to stay there, but I believe a lot of them ended up staying there because they didn't have any other option.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's still some dilapidated housing, a lot of that, um, just not very, caught up with the times. And, um, there's a lot of that. And that's just come from comfort. That's what they've come to know. I don't know if a lot of people in those types of environments think that they can achieve better or achieve more. And so, part of that is, the cycle being created from the beginning, and kind of what my dad said at some point, he's like, son, I didn't want to stay there. I know if I stayed there, I either wasn't gonna survive or I was gonna end up, doing drugs and, maybe losing my life or, just doing who knows what, his
Mhm.
life would have been completely different and he wouldn't have met my mom and I wouldn't have been here. So, there's a lot of that. At some point, we have to look at self and be like, man,
Mhm.
I'm tired of this, kind of like for those who are, blessed to be able to have running water at some point, if you're dirty, you're like, man, I'm tired of being dirty. I think I'm gonna go take a shower, but some people, beyond just that, some people are just comfortable, whether it's their mindset or where they live, their
Mhm.
lifestyle. Um, that's all they know. And so, yeah.
But now I want to focus in on that for just a moment, because again, one of the arguments that is made sometimes is when it comes to the opportunities, is the idea of systemic racism. For instance, is this is America, it's a land of equal opportunity. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, go make yourself something. Everybody can get an education, everybody can do this, everybody can do that. There's loans available, there's education available, all those things. There's truth to those statements, right? But we also do have to acknowledge that you can want the exact same thing I can want, and we can be from a very, very similar place, starting off economically, educationally. But the reality is there are doors that open for me because of, sometimes it's the sound of my name, in certain cases, job opportunities, things like that. Sometimes it's the color of my skin. So the starting place of, because I've heard a lot of people say, and especially white people, well, nothing was handed to me. I've had to work hard. That's true. And nobody's disputing that.
Right. That's not what white privilege is, right? It's not saying that you haven't had it difficult. That's not what that means.
Mhm.
It's the understanding that, kind of from where we started in the beginning, you don't have to have those conversations with your children about, their skin color or telling them to act a certain way or somebody's going to find them offensive or,
Mhm.
we live in America. Most of the people here are white. So there's more white people in positions who can hire and positions of leadership. And
Mhm.
so just statistically speaking, there's going to be more opportunities for white people.
Right. And that makes sense to a degree, because again, math works. Uh, but the opposite is also true, in that we can't ignore the fact that there are opportunities that are not made available that should be. And
Yes.
I'm a sports person. My dad was a sports reporter, so I follow a lot of sports. I'm not really as into it right now as I have been, but that's a whole different thing. But you look at college sports, or professional sports, and GMs and coaches, for instance, because it's something it gets talked about regularly. How many black GMs are there in major league sports, or running major college conferences? How many black head coaches are there? And one side, the argument is, well, if they're qualified, they'll get hired. But the other side is, like, I'm a basketball fan. Basketball is my favorite sport. I was a Bulls fan, so I hated the Knicks. It's just that simple. I can't deny that Patrick Ewing, though, was a great basketball player, has a great basketball mind, has spent years as an assistant getting overlooked for coaching opportunities, that people that get hired have way less experience, way less knowledge, and then they just don't do a good job. And it's like, what about Patrick Ewing over here?
That's a good point, Devin. There was an article that came out. I don't know if it was on Bleacher Report a few weeks ago. It was talking about the disparities. It was talking about the NFL, the coaching trees. Um, think about this. I'm going to come back to basketball in a second. Until recently, obviously, there's been the Moons and the McNabbs and who are some other former black quarterbacks in the NFL. See, it's hard for me to just even think about pre Michael Vick, pre Donovan McNabb black quarterbacks, but we can name umpteen white quarterbacks from the 70s on, right? Um, the position, there had been this train of thought that black people weren't smart enough to play quarterback. A lot of your coaches especially head coaches and coordinators, were quarterbacks. And so if Black people weren't allowed to play quarterback, even starting from children, then they're probably not going to play in high school. They're not going to play in college. They're not going to play in the NFL. And so this article broke down how many Black quarterbacks get switched from quarterback to a different position when they go from high school to college, and then how many white quarterbacks switch from quarterback to another position when they go from high school to college. And the disparity was astronomical. I was just like, obviously I knew there was a difference, but when they broke down the numbers, I was just like, man, there's that misconception that white people or Black people aren't as smart as white people, and that certain ethnicities are not as intellectually capable. And so from 50 years ago, oh, Black guy, he can't play quarterback. He can play running back though. He's fast. He can play running back, but he can't play quarterback. And so to come to the NBA, until probably the last 15, 20 years, I didn't really start watching the NBA until the late 90s, early 2000s. But if we go back, I think we can see that most point guards were probably white guys. You can answer that and tell me if that's true or not. That's a guess. But most of your coaches
80s.
are probably point guards.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I think there was a lot of that similar train of thinking. Point guard is kind of like the quarterback and in the NBA. And if a Black guy's not smart enough to be quarterback, he's not smart enough to be a point guard and run the team. But he can be a shooting guard. He might be able to shoot, or he's big. We can throw him in the post, but he's not smart enough to run the team and distribute the ball and point them there and get them to their spots on the floor. But now we've seen that point guard spot is kind of a transcendent position. Really, they're scoring a lot more now than they used to. So yeah, what can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, being an NBA fan the way that I am, there you have your Bill Russells, you have your
Right.
Wal Cinders, or those sorts of things. But really, until Isaiah Thomas, until Magic Johnson, the idea of a Black point guard, a Black person really being the focal point of most teams, they were the anomalies. They were the special, Wilt Chamberlain, but you can't argue with that. But most of them were your Bob Cousy's, your Pistol Pete Maravich's, those kinds of guys, until that point. And then with the advent of the television game, and it really began to change, because then who's watching the sport?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and this really, if you think about it logically, this makes sense. Who's watching the sport a lot of times are the people who are at home. Why are they at home? Because they don't have the job opportunities, and so then you need to then market to those people, because that's who's watching. You got to change your demographic. You got to change the way you do it. And so you start giving it becomes about money, is really what
Yeah.
it is. But yeah, I mean, until probably that time period, I mean, I can't say there were never any, but the vast majority of
Right.
superstars in the NBA and the leaders in the NBA would have been white, until Isaiah and Magic and that point, and Jordan, of course. Um, so yeah, but again, what I want to come back to with that is, so there's the opportunity aspect of the argument, and the equality of the opportunity, and it's difficult to accept in this day and age that is not the case, but yet the evidence is overwhelming that that's
Yeah.
not the case. But there is also what you've talked about, the mindset part of, you still have to want it. You talk about your father, you talk about that mentality of, okay, even if I don't have all the opportunities, I still do have to want it. That is a very real part of this too, isn't it?
It is. It is to kind of get back to where I was speaking about the finances. There's a lot of predatory lending uh, in places of low income.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of buy now, buy here, pay here car lots. A lot of check advance cashing places where they're charging 30 something percent on whatever they loan you. the rent centers, and what are some more of those errands, um, those places that, thrive off of people of low income. And those the people in those low income communities have no clue. Being a teacher, a health teacher, I'm kind of able to uh, kind of diversify my teachings, and with when it comes to personal health. Uh, some of what we speak about is being financially literate. Um, and so I speak to them and ask them questions and ask them their hearts and what their desires are. And, I'm like, so what do you think it's going to take to do that? And I'll be able to, break some of their, wrong thinking down. Like, well, you can't always, they love their shoes. You can't always go buy the newest Jordans. You can't always want the freshest outfit because those are the most expensive. And so I'll write all this stuff down on the board and do a mock budget with them. Like, man, your paycheck's already gone. What about your utilities over here? You got some student loans? You got to pay those off too. Oh, you can't pay your rent, man. You're going to get evicted. And so we start over, and we
Mhm.
start with the rent and the utilities and then the other bills. And I'm like, oh, guys, you only got $200 left. So you can't, you still got to buy food with that. So you can't go get clothing before you get the food. And so there's just some habits that have to be reshaped and broken. Um, uh, and there was this misperception that everybody had to go to college, and uh, everybody knows that everyone can't afford college out of their own pocket. And so I was a victim of being at an institution where loan or tuition was raised every year, and not until the last few years I finally understood it. Even then, it was proven, or it was written about in some article I read. And so I'd come to theorize, like, man, if I was able to graduate debt free, but I was like, man, if cats are taking out loans every year, and that money's coming straight from the federal or whoever these loan institutions are, straight to the colleges know they're going to get paid, and so they can raise their little 6% every year with tuition because they know they're going to get it
Right.
from those students, one, who are taking out loans, and two, the kids who are on scholarship, or three, the people who can, thankfully pay out of pocket.
Mhm.
Um, but they know they're going to get their money, and so that student loan issue has become a crisis. It's been a crisis, and then over the past few years, that has been exactly what I theorized was, has been the theme of the conversation. And so um, I don't know how that gets walked back. What I do know is that, people can, go to community college, especially in Kentucky. You can go to community college for free, even if you are not fresh out of high school. If you have a diploma or a GED, you can go to community college and get a degree, a 2-year degree or certificate for free without any money out of pocket, man. That is huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. Um, and so that's $20,000 that you don't have to pay out of pocket. You could have invested that if you're debt free, or if you had debt, that's $20 that could have gone toward debt. And so there's just a lot of stuff that I'm retraining kids and even my peers, man, because I'm I'm weird. I know most of my peers don't think like this, and I'm challenging them, and they're pushing back, but I'm challenging them and sharing this stuff on social media to whoever will listen, and whoever will listen if they're in my ear or if I'm in their ear.
Well, I remember a statement one of my professors at Bible school made that's always stuck with me. It said, knowledge and its proper use wins battles. And of course, he was talking about using the word of God in our lives, but really it applies across the board. You can know something. You can know that, debt is bad. You can know the system is rigged. You can know lots of things, but if you don't apply that knowledge and do something with it, it really doesn't do you any
It's
any
useless, exactly.
And what you said, I didn't know that about community college in Kentucky being free, because in Illinois, I went to community college, and I had to pay for it. Well, my
It's
dad paid.
new. It's only within like the past 3 or 4 years.
Okay, but there's also vocational school, trade schools,
Exactly. Yep. That's free.
technical jobs. I
Yep.
have a friend of mine that doesn't have a degree, doesn't have an education per se, but he just went through HVAC technician training,
Very well paying field.
and I mean he makes bank. I'm not even gonna lie. He told me, I was like, whoa, I need to do what you're doing, because that's a lot of money. No degree, and they trained him while paying him to learn the job. I was like, man, but it's hard work. I mean,
Yeah.
you're working in the rain, you're working in the heat, you're working in the cold, whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's hard work. And so that turns some people off.
Hmm.
But the opportunities are not always something that everybody's aware of as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's a huge part of the disparity too, of if you don't know, if you don't have guidance counselors, for instance, that are giving the same information to everybody, or that have the information, if you don't have parents who have connections. Like my friend got into that HVAC program because his dad knew the guy who happened to own the business.
Yeah.
Connections are important, information is important, and that's a disparity as well. But that's something we can address, that's something we can fix. So I guess, and as we wrap up, we've talked about a lot of things. What are some things that you think are concrete steps that can be taken in the home, in society, in the church, in whatever area, to help bridge this gap, to heal this divide? I mean, I don't think we're going to solve all the world's problems, but we can make it a little better, to where
Absolutely.
your kids, my kids, I don't know if you have kids yet,
No, not yet.
uh,
Not.
where they don't experience what we're experiencing right now, all the shouting and yelling and all, because of misunderstanding, because of missed opportunities, because of oppression. We can do that. What are some things that you think are concrete steps? Go ahead.
Some concrete steps for those who are in a traditional family. Um, I think there has to be uh, proper teaching of the kids. Um, and even before that, you got to check your own heart and see where you might have some missed teachings. My wife and I are working through that now with each other, and kind of undoing some teachings that we have had instilled in us from an early age and from different arenas.
Mhm.
And so there has to be some self-awareness. But again, you don't know if you're in the wrong unless you have somebody who can help you reflect and hold up a mirror.
Mhm.
And our mirror is the Bible, and we help hold that up for each other, so that we can see where we need Jesus in our lives.
Mhm.
Uh, and so that has to be the starting point. You can't teach something properly unless it's properly in your heart first. And
Mhm.
so once you kind of get that working, you can then properly teach um, your children, and not that, oh, don't see color. Color is a reflection of Jesus. Color is beautiful. You should be able to see color and embrace it, and think that every color of every skin is beautiful. You shouldn't have to say, oh, I don't see color. I think people mean well when they say that, Devin, but I think what they really should say is, man, I see your color and I love it and it's beautiful.
Mhm.
Not that, oh, I don't see skin color. Oh, well, we clearly have eyes. We can see pigmentation. I can see that your skin is lighter than mine, Devin. And so that it's just like kind of this faux humility, I guess. I don't know what to call it, but
Mhm.
I think that should be the mindset. I see you, Devin. I love you, bro. And I love your skin color, man. Your skin color does not deter my thinking. Yes, there you go. Another step, for families that are not as traditional, that don't have two parents in them, a husband, or a father and a mother. You know, I think there should be some men around the children who are positive influences. So families, parents, aunts, uncles, grandmas, grandpas, whoever's raising the children, you got to have some positive thinking good-hearted men, and then for my instance, I'm going to say Christian men who are positive thinkers, who have proper teaching, who can instill the love of Christ into a child to go and spread love into the world as Jesus would. And another side of that is, for people who are not here near the middle, who can have that conversation, man, just showing them grace as Jesus would, and that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's what Jesus would do. He would just take it. He took all the insults, man. And obviously, none of us are like Jesus, and we're not going to be able to, hold a can of water to him. But at the end of the day, we are supposed to aspire to reflect his image, with the empowerment of Holy Spirit. And the only way to do that is if we open up our Bible, man, and let those words in the Bible reshape our heart.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, even for people who may be watching that they're not religious,
Mm-hmm.
we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Absolutely.
That's the very foundation of the idea of America as
Absolutely.
well. And yet again, as we've talked about, there are a lot of ways that wasn't walked out. But now we're at a place where we can say, okay, that was wrong, but here we are. Let's
Right.
do it right going forward. Let's live up to that. We can acknowledge that was wrong. We can acknowledge that there were some good things that were set up, but that there were some things that were wrong that were done. And that, again, inequality, systemic racism, all those things are real in there, but we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. Let's go forward from there, and let's build on that.
That's it.
We can do it. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, and it takes the knowledge, it takes the willingness, it takes the discussion that is uncomfortable sometimes. I mean, again, when you find out that your mindset is wrong, it can feel personal. And I think that's where we've gotten in this country, is that white people feel attacked. Well, black people have felt attacked for 400 years. I mean, really longer than that
Yeah.
historically, but
Right.
in America, so welcome to the club, everybody. Let's get past how we feel and start looking at what's happening and asking the questions, okay, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And I love what you've said here of, start in the family, start with yourself, start with your kids, start with looking around who are some people who may be mentors and coaches and, ministers or grandparents and all those sorts of things. Being active and involved and engaged is a huge part of it. And then being intentional about finding ways to connect with people that are not like I am, to interact with people that are not like I am, not for the purpose of, well, this is why, or I have to do this, but I want to learn. I want to know. I want to know you. I want to know about you. I want to know who you are. I want to know how are we different? How are we alike?
And when the
Because that
kids see that,
builds
when
the
the kids
grit.
see that happening, they see that that's normal. Oh, it's normal for mommy and daddy or for big brother to have friends who don't look like him and just love each other. They'll see that's normal.
Yes, and that is doable.
It is.
That's doable. Right now, today, that's doable. And I believe it's important and it's needed. Very, very needed. Well, Cameron, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insight and your experience as well. I greatly appreciate it. Everybody watching, thank you. I hope that there have been some things, again, maybe that challenge you, maybe that stir you, maybe that you didn't know. Go check out the Netflix documentary, The 13th, if you haven't already done that, and ask questions. I mean, that's what started this for me with Cameron was I don't understand this. I know there's something that I'm missing. I know there's something I don't know. Let's talk about this. And then starting to learn. It's okay to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I was wrong about something. I didn't get this. I didn't see that. It's okay to not be okay. It's not okay to stay that way.
That's good.
That's what it is. And so I hope that if anybody watches this and they're stirred in some way to press forward, to learn, to grow, to engage, then this has been valuable time. So thank you again very much, Cameron. Thank you everybody for watching, and I look forward to you joining us again.
I appreciate the invitation, Devin.
Thank you. Bye.